So far we have been discussing about the brain, the structure of the brain, parts of the brain, how to look at or understand various parts of the brain, especially in the imaging context. With both of this or all of this, not both, all of this, all of these methodologies, I hope you have had an understanding of what goes on within each one of our skulls. So, a continuation of the anatomy is spinal cord anatomy. I am listing it out as a separate topic because it is not possible to proceed further without discussing the anatomy of the spinal cord to some extent. A very detailed anatomy is out of scope, is not required for the current setting, and we will discuss whatever is relevant and necessary to understand for further topics in the course. So, the spinal cord is a cylindrical structure, and when I say cylindrical, you should imagine it something like this. It is a 3-dimensional structure, and it continues from the brainstem. What I mean by continuous from the brainstem is the medulla, lower part of the medulla almost indistinguishable from the spinal cord. There are internal changes, internal structural changes which happen between the brainstem and the spinal cord, but there is also a lot of spillover from the brainstem into the spinal cord. That being the case, we will try to understand what are the various parts of the cord. Now, the spinal cord in turn is divided into something called as segments. So, what is the notion of a segment is each segment provides a spinal nerve. We are bilaterally symmetrical. So, there are two spinal nerves on two sides, and each segment as such does some particular function. If you remember my earlier discussion on during the skull, I had told you the difference between spinal nerves vis-a-vis cranial nerves. So, cranial nerves are pretty specialized, when I say optic nerve, it does carry only light impulses from the eye back to the head. Olfactory is the same. There are some nerves which do mixed functions, for example, the trigeminal nerve which does chewing as well as sensations from the face and from the scalp and the head. Spinal nerves that way are monotonous in the sense that they contain both the sensory and the motor components. Not only that, they distribute, they go across various parts of the body and then take in information which is very similar, say in the sense that you have pain, touch, temperature, all these sensory modalities which are taken up by every single spinal nerve to almost an equal extent. The distributions vary, but the data which is captured by each spinal nerve is just about the same. Motor is also the same, and the motor impulses go from the part of the spinal cord as the anterior horn cell of the spinal cord, and from there it goes on to individual motor cells, and that is also pretty monotonous. The way in which the neurons give out these fibers, the way they traverse through individual segments of the spinal cord is pretty monotonous. So, with that background, we will look at histological image of the spinal cord. So, this is ventral. So, in the earlier class I had told you what ventral means is towards the front, and this is towards the back. So, that will be dorsal. So, that is the way in which you interpret. If you remember again, I had discussed the architecture of white matter versus grey matter. So, this lighter pink is the white. White basically means fibers. fibers basically means axons, and the gray stuff is the gray matter, this darker stuff is the gray matter. So, it is opposite to the cerebrum and cerebellum, which I have shown both in 3D model as well as in the imaging, where you see the darker gray cortex outside and the inside of it is the white matter, of course, the deep gray nuclei accepting. So, that is just about there is also this thing called as the central canal, then there is this ventral fissure, ventral sulcus, and dorsal fissure. So, this thing is the dorsal fissure, ventral sulcus. So, this thing is called as the anterior horn. This is the posterior horn. So, that is about the way in which the structures are arranged. There is another thing to be told is about the split in the cord approximately, where this part is the sensory and this part is motor. It is not a very hard and fast rule, but you would notice that the gray matter anterior is responsible for musculature, whereas the gray matter posterior is responsible for sensations. So, various kinds of sensations from various parts of the body are there, and then that has to be compiled incidentally. So, the spinal cord does compile information and then sends it across to the brainstem, to the thalamus, to the sensory cortex, and that is how information processing happens within our bodies. So, so that being the structure, we will go to the next level to have a little more understanding of what all happens within that. As I told you, the white matter is arranged in form of tracts. So, tracts means a single group of cables, which is basically axons. These cables run in very defined manners. There are no boundaries as such. So, there are no definitive boundaries between each of these things, but there is an organizational and topological structure to it. So, these fibers are related to each other and they are organized in the same fashion across all human beings. There are no variations between that, and we need to have some understanding of these things for further discussion. So, the easiest part, which I told you, that is the anterior part is the motor and the posterior part is the sensory. So, imagine that you have there is one more thing which I have to tell. So, what are segments? Segments, I told you, are regions in which there is a particular single spinal nerve which is coming out of it. So, how many segments would be there in the spinal cord? So, there are cervical, that is the neck, 8, dorsal, thoracic, 12, this is the chest, lumbar, 5, that is the low back, and sacral, 5, this is back and this should be low back. Coccygeal is about a 1. So, these are the numbers of, and these are constant in the sense that they are exactly the same across all human beings, and these are bilateral. So, you have one on either side of the cord, and each level at which the nerve comes out is defined to be a spinal segment. So, the idea of a segment is that there is a lot of local processing which happens. So, each segment attends to stuff which happens at that particular segment. So, that is the there is a managerial role which the segment does. So, there are some things which are done within segment, some things which are done out of segment. So, that is the idea of having how segments work and why there is a functional connect to the anatomical idea. So, anatomical in the sense that is how we observe. When we open up the dura surrounding the spinal cord, we would see the spinal cord with these exit nerves. Now, another thing which I need to specify is how do these things actually how are these things actually each segment. So, each segment gives out two sets of or rather total of 4 nerve bundles. You will be seeing nerve bundles which are coming out from each segment. So, there are 2 anterior, 2 posterior. Anterior is ventral, this is posterior is dorsal, which is also means 2 on the right and 2 on the left. Sorry, total of 4, 2 anterior and 2 dorsal and 2 on the right and 2 on the left. So, it is basically right and left, and the front ones, the ventral ones are motor, dorsal ones sensory. So, this is also something which has to be kept in mind. So, the basis of this is what I was actually planning to discuss in this slide. So, we have already told that this part anteriorly is the motor part, where the motor neurons of the muscles are present, and these motor neurons get fibers from above. Now, I told you that some fibers are there, tracts are there in the medulla which cross over, but also there are some tracts in the medulla which do not cross over. So, 80% of the fibers cross from one side to another side, 15% do not cross over to either side, and that is the basis of having this corticospinal tract. So, please note this anterior corticospinal tract and the lateral corticospinal tract. So, these are the 2 anterior corticospinal tracts, and the lateral corticospinal tract is not labeled proper. Yeah, so that is the undescended part. So, they have not gone to the opposite side. That is the point which I am trying to make. So, these fibers which are crossed over form majority of the output of the brain, and they carry information about how the muscles should act and when they should act, and all the larger goals of the brain which have to be implemented by the spinal cord. And from there on they go and meet these cells, synapse with these cells, so as to make it technical, and from the anterior horn cells they come out through the anterior root, and that is the motor root. So, that is how things work. The lateral corticospinal tract also goes into the anterior horn cells, and from the anterior horn cells give out fibers which go into individual skeletal muscles and innervate them. Now, looking at the sensory is sensations are touch, pain and temperature, pain and temperature. Then there is something called proprioception. vibration. So, proprioception and vibration, pain and temperature and touch. So, these are the various, that is how the sensory system is organized. So, there are classes of fibers which deal with these sensations. Not only there are specific sensors, not sensory sensors which take in a particular set of data. Even the pathway which carries that data into various parts of the brain is highly specialized. So, there is you do not mix up, say you do not mix up between pain and touch. Touch is separate, pain is separate, pain and temperature are actually closely associated. Proprioception, which is the sense of position. So, position in the body is very important for the body to have a sense of itself and to do any further action. That maintains the proprioceptive sensation sort of maintains the coordinate system of the body in a dynamic sense. So, at all points of time you may not be conscious of where you are sitting, but there are parts of your body in your head which keep continuously you are aware that you are I am sitting on the back with force being put on my chair, elbow is resting on the armrest. So, all this data is collected. It may not come into my conscious being that I am applying so much of force on the chair, not too much force on the hand. So, that is not always there in my conscious thought process. It is, but it is acquired, it is assimilated and acted upon. So, to make you understand why it is so irrelevant is, you must have heard of bed sores affecting people who are lying down, who are not conscious. So, though the sensory systems sensors are active in such people, the higher level processing which says that the pressure on a particular area is too high, it is too persistent, is not it may be perceived, but can't be acted upon because the patient is not conscious. So, that is the basis of formation of bed sores. So, each of these sensory modalities are taken up from the respective sensor systems, then carried upstream. So, how the upstream part of it is what is shown over here. Now, of this touch, proprioception and vibration are very important sensations for the body, and they are carried through fast receptors. Incidentally, pain, which is a very we would consider pain as the most important sensation, but it is carried through relatively slow fibers. So, how that goes through is what I am trying to showcase over here. So, the fibers which the fibers which come from the leg enter into the spinal cord and then get packed up over here. So, that is the sacral cords are the most medial. The next set of fibers enter in and then go over here and then it goes over here. So, that is there is a laminar architecture, that is the point of telling all of these things. Not only laminar architecture, there is also bilateral symmetry in the spinal cord. So, both the sides are separate, independent, and these fibers are densely packed, and then this entire area is responsible for transmitting touch and proprioception and vibration. Now, on the contrary, when we look at pain fibers, they enter the same pathway, because this is the sensory route. So, sensory route is through here, motor route is through here, and the sensory fibers which touch and pain immediately go to the respective laminae. The pain fibers, on the other hand, actually traverse to the opposite side. So, then they traverse to the opposite side, and where do we go? They go into the spinal thalamic tracts. So, there are two groups of fibers. So, pain comes from here, crosses over to the opposite side after some levels. It is not in the same segment. Then it goes like this. So, that is why you got sacral first, then you got lumbar, then thoracic, and then cervical. So, that is the way in which the fibers. So, the first the fiber which gets into the tract gets superficial to that, superficial in the sense from the other direction, from the cord direction, a newer fiber comes and sits closely with that. So, this is how the body sort of keeps track of what sensation is coming from what part of the body. It is not mixed. It is not that there is a relay station somewhere in the spinal cord which takes up data from various parts of the body and transfers. It is not like that. There is an anatomical mapping. So, the mapping starts from somewhere over here. So, mapping is the fibers come from various levels, they undergo packing within the spinal cord in the same fashion in which the fibers are entering into the spinal cord, which sort of gives a natural sense of packing. And then these fibers go up into the brainstem, maintain the same fidelity. There is some rotation, there is some turning which happens in that group of tracts, but the overall structure and overall organization of say sacral, thoracic, sacral, lumbar, thoracic, cervical remains the same, and they all go to specific areas within the thalamus, and from the thalamus they go to these respective sensory cortices. So, sensory cortex, I showed you one single gyrus, but the gyrus itself has got homunculus distribution, but it has areas in the gyrus which are specific for different kinds of sensations. So, the highest center of integration of the sensory pathway is the sensory cortex, where all these sensations are merged and then the brain somehow infers what is happening and various parts of the body. So, there is a direct mapping between a fiber which comes from the tip of the toe all the way up to the cortex. So, there are destined pathways, defined cells which undertake this mapping. So, that is how various sensations are carried forward. Corticospinal, cortico is up, spinal is down. So, they go from the top cortex to the spine. Spinothalamic, so that is reverse. So, spine is spinal cord and thalamus is up, and that is because it is pain and temperature. Then the dorsal column is the lemniscus system. Lemniscus is a laminar arrangement of fibers. So, there are two fibers for the upper limb and two sets of fibers for the upper limb and lower limb. Now, if you notice, there are so many other tracts, it is a very compact, very dense, and that is why spinal cord injuries are so difficult to treat. So, not just difficult, impossible to treat as of now. So, spinocerebellar. So, these are fibers which go from the spine and they go into the cerebellum. Remember in the anatomy discussion that I told that the pons is connected to the cerebellum through three separate peduncles, superior, middle and inferior. These fibers, the posterior goes to the inferior and anterior goes to the superior peduncle. So, that's how the organization is. There is a lot of fibers which go from the cortex back into the cerebellum also. The cerebellum is a place where a lot of integration of signals happen, and it does so by comparing input versus output. So, input is coming from the cortex, the output information is coming from the periphery through the spinal cord into the cerebellum, and the cerebellum sort of sets the gain. So, we will talk about it later detail. So, that is how the cerebellum functions, and so these pathways are important because they transfer the information from the periphery to this one, and again remember they are designated pathways. They are like rail tracks, and each rail track carries only a particular kind of train which contains a particular kind of information, and it is coded, it is evolutionarily preserved, and it is maintained. So, you can think of more efficient pathways, but somehow evolution thought that is not the way to go about it. The spinal cord, for all its complexity, a lot of complexity is sort of simplified by this laminar architecture in which spatial fidelity is maintained throughout the transfer of information from one part. But on the contrary, different sensations do not have the same kind of fidelity. Say for example, touch and pain, touch and vibration and proprioception go posteriorly much faster. Pain on the other hand goes first to the spinal cord, does some local process over there, and then goes via slower mechanism up to the thalamus, from where it is passed on to various other parts of the spinal cord. So So, there are other kinds. Say vestibulospinal is from the vestibular apparatus. Vestibular apparatus is important because the vestibular apparatus is responsible for balance. So, balance is not just about balance of the body, but is also balance of the head upon the shoulders and things like that. The sensory organs for the vestibule are located in the inner ear, and you should understand that that is responsible for the balance of a lot of the most part of the body. So, there is a lot of communication which has to happen between the ear canals and the rest of the body. So, that when you turn your head you should not just fall off. So, there is communication which needs to happen between that part, and that is in fact taken care by the vestibulospinal tract. There are nuclei within the brainstem. The olivary nucleus is a big nucleus. So, that is a fiber tract which goes to that. Reticulospinal is important because the reticular formation is the formation traditionally associated with consciousness. That is a network extending across the central part of the brainstem. We have discussed the midbrain, pons and medulla. Central part of the brainstem contains these fibers, and these fibers are responsible for maintaining what we understand as consciousness. So, there are outputs from the reticulospinal tract into various parts of the body through the spinal cord. They may serve as modulators, they tune activation and decay, delay and so many other things which I would not know. So, to summarize, the spinal cord is segmental. It integrates several kinds of data. It also gives out several kind of data. So far I have just spoken to you about only as a conduit of the spinal cord being a conduit of information from the brain to the periphery and from the periphery to the brain. Subsequently, we will start seeing the bigger role the spinal cord function in which spinal cord functions and see how necessary it is for our activity. But for the time being, I would want you to remember these tracts, the organization of the gray and white matter, and the topological structure, topological organization of the spinal cord, and how anatomical fidelity is maintained throughout the spinal cord.